Hello everybody and welcome back to Culz Book Reviews. For the final book of the Halloween season, I actually chose The Ghosts of Chicago, the Windy City's Most Famous Haunts by Adam Selzer. We have previously done a review on Ghosts of Lincoln, one of Adam's other books. So having previously read The Ghosts of Lincoln, my expectations were pretty high, I would say sky high, especially when you add in the fact it's about Chicago, which, if you guys know, it's my favorite city. It has a lot of my favorite things, like my favorite building in the Sears Tower, my favorite museums, and a lot of family history. So I was pretty stoked to read this one. But before we get into that, let's check out the cover. So right off the bat, you obviously see the title, The Ghosts of Chicago, the Windy City's Most Famous Haunts, as well as below you see Adam, his name there. And then just this beautiful, haunting skyline picture of Chicago along the river. You actually see the Mather Tower right here, just poking out. And it's just a beautiful picture and beautiful composition. But then obviously the color changing in the skies just makes it feel kind of haunting and ominous. And oh man, it's good just from the start. Right there, the side, you see the Ghosts of Chicago, Selzer, and then on the back, just a little bit about it, including, some of the topics. You got Resurrection Mary, Al Capone, you got H.H. Holmes, just a lot of great stuff to go into, which we'll definitely get into in just a second. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the ISBN because it is covered. So this book clocks in at 325 pages, though. I would have been okay with a lot more. I mean, I'll get into that in a second, but it was absolutely a fantastic read. And as I flip, you will see, obviously, a lot of text, as you expect from a book, but also a lot of cool pictures and or historical, just diagrams or how things would have been. Some cool ghost pictures, as you see there. And honestly, that really adds to a lot of it, especially if you don't know a lot of history. It's actually funny, if we go back to that mausoleum right here. So the couch tomb is kind of funny because when I was reading this, I had just finished this chapter, and actually I was scrolling through Instagram and he had actually posted a current picture in the fog of the couch tomb, and I was like, oh, that's a funny coincidence, right? But yeah, just going through, as you see, lots of cool pictures, historical pictures. You saw H.H. Holmes just back there. So let's get into the book. So do I recommend this book? Yes, I do recommend this book, because let's just start off there. It perhaps is now my favorite ghost book I have ever read. And while I've not given a perfect book score out, it's hard not to say it's a 10 out of 10. Like, for me, I always actually super looked forward to reading it. It was never a bore. I know we've had a couple this year that were like really close like that. Just so close at like a 9 out of 10. But this one's definitely above those. So I guess I have to say 10 out of 10. I mean, it combines, like I said, Chicago with ghosts and with history. And I mean, how can I get better? For me personally, those are like some of my favorite topics. So all of them combined, and especially with how Adam writes, you see a lot of, just his personality coming through. It's not just that, how can I say this? A lot of times when people write these type of books, it's almost kind of a copy or paste. Quite literally, in one of the books I've reviewed, where they did a history of Colorado ghost hunting one, where they just copied a website and printed it out as a book. This one, on the other hand, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of personality, and it's never boring. Like, there's always something. Sometimes you chuckle, sometimes you're horrified. I mean, to the point that, I don't know. It's just perfectly written. So let's get into some of the stories I really enjoyed. We'll start off with this chapter about the John Hancock Center. Obviously one of Chicago's most recognizable buildings, perhaps only beaten by the Sears Tower and maybe like the Tribune or Wrigley buildings. This is an icon of the Chicago skyline. And for a long time, there has been stories passed down, perhaps just urban legends, of the Hancock Center. And this chapter is not super long, but the Hancock Center has garnered enough attention paranormally that even poltergeists took place there. Alright, we'll go into chapter 11 next, which talks about Lincoln Park. It talks about how, while Couch Tomb is still there and perhaps some other bodies, it was moved and now made a park. This one, for me, brings a lot of memories back of us talking about Cheeseman Park here in Denver, which was a similar story where Cheeseman, was turned into a park after the cemetery had kind of sat dormant and was decrepit and fallen apart. They were supposed to move the bodies, and the gravedigger was actually just taking apart bodies, putting them in 2 to 3 different caskets, child-sized caskets, to make more money. Bones were sitting all over. It was just a mess, and they eventually abandoned it. And even to this day, they still dig up skeletons from Cheeseman Park, which we've talked about in a previous episode, link above. Man, so many things. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, obviously everyone knows this story, or at least I feel like if you're a history person at all, you should know this story about, there's a huge rivalry between Capone and Moran, and, at one point, some of Moran's people were shot down in a pretty brutalistic fashion where, the story goes that it was people dressed as police lined them up and shot them all with their backs turned. And so obviously this is pretty infamous in the lore of Chicago and the history of Chicago. And for us, as far as me and my brother Colin, this actually happened not too far from our Papu's restaurant in Chicago. And there's a lot of history that we have where, not like direct history, but at least Moran and Capone and sometimes Dillinger would go into the restaurant. When our Papu was out of sugar for making candy, Moran had actually lent him some sugar to help make his favorite candy. Obviously, H.H. Holmes is pretty infamous now. Some people even saying that he could be Jack the Ripper. Though I think if you look at the timelines, it doesn't quite add up. And, we'll get into more of H.H. Holmes in another by Adam at some point in the future. Still, it is always interesting to see more of a true take and not so much of a fantastical take on the H.H. Holmes story where, yeah, he was still a bad guy, but he wasn't like Jack the Ripper. Another one is the Eastland disaster, which, is about the Eastland and the wreck it had on the river where it capsized and a lot of people died. And to this day, I think it's a largely forgotten story. Even in Chicago, I don't know how many people still remember it. I think in Chicago it's going to be more than the rest of the United States, but honestly, it's one that's fallen by the wayside. And we'll just do one more because there's so many I could keep going on and on. But we'll talk about Resurrection Mary and Resurrection Cemetery, which is a story that we've kind of touched upon just briefly, especially with Scott.
My name's Scott Creeksize. I was born and raised in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois called Justice. I grew up about a block and a half from Resurrection Cemetery. I've pretty much been raised with learning about paranormal stuff with Resurrection Mary, the famous ghost of Resurrection Cemetery.
But yeah, I really could keep going on and on. I know I kind of made this story short, but it's because I want you guys to go check it out. It is a harder book to find, though not as hard as some of the other books we have covered. It's still a rarer book to find. I do recommend it. If you can find it, it's currently on Amazon, though it's about $40. But if you can find it, I do highly recommend it. It's really, really good. Outside of just the really good writing style and mixing a lot of my favorite things, like I said at the beginning, there's also a lot of awesome history that you could read in this. If you don't believe in ghosts at all, there's a lot of good history in this book. And if you like urban legends, there's urban legends in this book. And if you want to know the truth behind the urban legends, is there any truth? That's in this book as well. And is there tips? Yes. Is there ghost stories? Yes. Like I said, it combines so much of what I really enjoy. It's hard for it not to be the perfect read. And it was the perfect capstone, to say the least, of our Halloween season book review little session that we had this year, and I hope you guys check it out. Like I said, we'll do some of Adam's other books. We've previously done Ghosts of Lincoln. I think he's a really good writer, and if you guys want to get into some of the cool history, I recommend it. So before I keep just going on and perhaps sounding like a broken record, it's fantastic. 10 out of 10. I do recommend it. Go check it out. Links in the description below, and I'll link to pages with Adam as he's on Instagram and Twitter, and always shares lots of cool little history tidbits here and there. So go check it out. But if you want to see more Culz book reviews, click the link to your left. If you want to see more about what we do here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, have you read The Ghost of Chicago? And A, what's your favorite haunted place? Or B, just your favorite place in Chicago, period?